Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Colonization, Sport and Recreation, Key Learnings from the Siege of Kanehsatà, featuring Ellen Gabriel, Nicole Levesque, and Jacqueline Scott. We're very happy that you could take time out of your schedules to join us today as part of the UFT Sport and Rec Diversity and Equity Virtual Conference. This session was put together in partnership with the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education Sport and Rec Division, the SJE, Social Justice Education, Solidarity with Wet'suwet'en Student Group, and the Faculty of Medicine, Office of Inclusion and Diversity. So to begin the session today, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Bannon.
Hello, everyone. I just want to thank everyone on behalf of SJE Solidarity with Wet'suwet'en. And just to tell you a bit about us, SJE Solidarity with Wet'suwet'en formed in February 2020 to answer the call for support from the Unpacked camp. The Wet'suwet'en land defenders are mobilizing against the invasion of their land by the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which is supported by the Canadian and British Columbia governments and enforced by the RCMP. We understand that the pipeline and the invasion of Indigenous territory are a continuation of settler colonialism and that the struggle against CGL is linked to many other movements. While we remain focused on raising awareness that the pipeline construction is ongoing and the urgent health crisis that this poses during COVID-19 pandemic, we are also in solidarity with the many interlinked movements that are organizing for transformative change and invested in a future that centers Indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation. And now Nicole will be doing a land acknowledgement for us. Nicole
Levesque.
Anderson.
Oh, Anderson, we got you.
Thank you, Nicole Levesque.
So Nicole, are you muted or do you want me to start?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Okay. Sorry, technical issues there. But yeah, I'm going to offer a short land acknowledgement and a reflection. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which the Faculty of Medicine operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We want to recognize that we are gathered in an institution with a colonial history and that we should work to address ongoing colonial harms. Land acknowledgements are only a starting point for larger conversations. More concrete actions of restitution and transformation are needed to address underlying inequities and blatant discrimination in the distribution of resources between Canada's First Peoples and settlers. In giving this land acknowledgement, we must not performatively or passively reflect on its meaning, but commit to meaningful actions that dismantle settler colonial and anti-Black oppressive systems. This event is hosted by an institution that not only has a colonial history, but is situated in a colonial present, and so our location within the system cannot go unaddressed. As a white settler, I benefit daily from these institutions that have oppressed and continue to oppress Black and Indigenous folks. My complicity means I must actively challenge these systems of white supremacy. In hosting events about colonization, we must ensure that we situate these discussions with calls for land back and honor the ongoing legacies of resistance from Indigenous folks by standing in solidarity and heeding calls to action from land and water defenders. Such actions include paying reparations, fundraising and organizing supply drives for land defenders, engaging with mutual aid and collective care projects, showing up to protests, and writing and advocating to politicians. Actively advocating for land back is the most meaningful way to acknowledge our place on this land, and it's fundamental in committing to our responsibility as settlers. And now I'll pass you on to Shannon, who will introduce our speakers.
Thanks so much, Nicole. So my name is Shannon Yansapulu. I'm one of the members of the SJE Solidarity Group, and I'm also a program coordinator at the Faculty of Medicine Office of Inclusion and Diversity. And so now I have the pleasure of introducing our really brilliant speakers. So Miss Ellen Gabriel was well known to the public when she was chosen by the people of the Longhouse in her community of the Kanehsatà to be their spokesperson during the 1990 Oka crisis. She is currently an active board member of Kanien'kehá Mohawk Language Custodian Association and is as steering committee member with Indigenous Climate Action. She has been an Indigenous human rights and environmental activist since 1990. She has consistently advocated for the rights of Indigenous peoples, presenting at the Quebec National Assembly, the Parliamentary and Senate committees, and the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In recognition of her work, in 2005, Ms. Gabriel received the Golden Eagle Award from the Native Women's Association of Canada and the 2008 International Women's Day Award from the Quebec Bar Association. In August 2008, Ms. Gabriel was the recipient of the Indigenous Women's Initiative Kanien'kehá Women of Peace Award and is a recipient of the Senate of Canada's 150th anniversary medal. And I would like to note that we held an event with land defenders from across Canada earlier this month, and many of them named Ellen Gabriel as one of their heroes that they look up to. Jacqueline L. Scott is a PhD student at the University of Toronto at OISE in the Department of Social Justice Education. She is a hike leader with 2 outdoor clubs. Jacqueline leads Black History Walks in Toronto. She is the author of travel and adventure books, From a Black Perspective, 50 Places, A Black History Travel Guide of London, Heartbeats in Africa, A Memoir of Travel, and Love and Sailing on a Half Moon. And Nicole Levesque is a Wyandot artist from Toronto, Ontario. Nicole has been a fancy shawl jingle dress dancer for over 13 years, teaching dance for over 11 years at various organizations throughout the Greater Toronto Area. She was featured in Emmy Ill-Fated's 2019 music video, The Hills, Snotty Nose Res Kids' 2019 music video, I Can't Remember My Name, and the 2019 Polaris Gala Awards, Dancing for Snotty Nose Red Kids alongside her daughter, Nazarene Pope. Currently, Nicole is an Equity Studies and Indigenous Studies major at the University of Toronto and a part-time employee of N&N Afro-Indigenous Designs. Nicole strives to be a positive role model within the Indigenous community of Toronto. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm really pleased to start off our panel by posing our first questions to Ellen. So we've asked Ellen to respond to 2 main questions. Dr. Ronaldo Walcott has said that sport is deeply implicated, not just in the national history, but also in producing the nation itself. So we're wondering if Ellen can discuss with us how have sports and recreation been used as tools to justify and produce the colonial project in so-called Canada, particularly thinking about the example of the Siege of Kanehsatà and the Kanien'kehá resistance. And as well, what are ways non-Indigenous people involved in sport and recreation can act in solidarity with Indigenous land defenders?
Can you see me? It keeps asking me to share my mic. It asks me a million times.
We can see. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, what's going on? Rado se vaguea com kasi ako sniyo jat tanu yato kanya kahaga gyanto tanu Kanehsatà na kenakere tanu tachinu rado nene ngoi tsu tachinu rado oni ne ka satsara so ayer tachinu rado nene yete isang hunsa tanu tachinu rado aguea ko tawana. So I just want to greet all the relations that every time we have a discussion, we're supposed to be bringing in. So I did a very, very, very short acknowledgement to all those life cycles, those natural life cycles, Mother Earth and all of creation, because we're living another day and we're seeing that so many changes in the world today. I mean, it's not just sports and recreation. If I could just sort of expand on your question, but definitely in 1990 was the expansion of the 9-hole golf course into an 18-hole golf course, and we had to protect the pines. 30 years ago today, we're protecting the pines from recreation of marijuana and pot shacks, and they're cutting down the pines. This is our own people. So we have a lot to think about as Indigenous people, and I know it's not just here in Kanehsatà, but right across Canada. People are looking at the money that comes in from companies, third parties, or government for sports and recreation, whether it's parks, which take away the rights of self-determination and our access to our traditional homelands. Because you have to go into a park, you either have to show your band card or you have to pay. And these are your traditional homelands. For golf courses, they take an enormous amount of land just to play golf. And I want to say up front, I never played golf until 2004, and I quite enjoyed it. But I guess it's like a guilty pleasure, and I haven't played in years, anyways. But it's to understand, it's not so much the activity, it's really in regarding to human rights and the ability for Indigenous people to apply their laws to their traditional territories. Because what's happening because of colonization is that it takes a band council under the Indian Act and it limits its power, whereas our traditional laws and our traditional territories that we have been trying to attempt to for us anyways, over 300 centuries, is a law or constitution that is truly democratic, has gender-based equality. The women are title holders to the land and they're protectors of the land, and the men protect the people. That's not to say they don't have rights, but it's a collective right. And it also includes, as I mentioned, into a more eloquent, what we call onhantakariwatekwa, which is the word said before all else. And it includes the rights of the environment. It includes the rights of all our relations, which includes, whether it's the plants, the trees, the birds, the water, the fish. Those are all things we're supposed to be including in the day-to-day stuff. So you're building a golf course, you're building a football field, a soccer field. How many animals have been displaced because we are so narcissistic as a species that we think we have the right to take away those lands? Now in Kanien'kehá, they were talking and trying to protect the moose. Here in the area where, we're 1 hour outside of Montreal, urban sprawl is spreading. There's more homes and more parks to be built, and we don't have access to our traditional territories because Canada is still basing their sovereignty on the doctrine of discovery and racist doctrines which have been condemned by the United Nations. So what Canada and people need to do is, sure, it's okay to have sports, it's okay to have those kinds of recreational activities because we all need that. But one of the things that people need to keep in mind is that when we're talking about reconciliation, as we have been for too long, without any real reconciliation, it includes land back, it includes reparations, and it includes a new relationship, not this unbalanced relationship where Canada bases it on oppression and colonization and assimilation, but a new relationship that is equal, that we are able to make the decisions and be self-determining. And for me, self-determination, it's about how much do you need to survive. It's that one dish, one spoon. We're all eating from the same bowl. We're using all the same spoon. When with that spoon, we take what we need. And this is not this is not how the world works, right? If you're rich, you can take more. This is the attitude even of our own people, but this is the attitude of the colonizer. And because land dispossession continues today, either for the sake of energy security, job security, all these things that are priorities for Western governments, but in our traditional teachings, our ancestral teachings, it's important to have a good quality of life. But for Indigenous people, we have not had a good quality of life since Europeans arrived and decided to exploit the differences between our nations, and then to create the Indian Act, which still exists. People are talking about a politically correct form of addressing us as the first peoples of Turtle Island. But under Canada's laws, we are still Indians under the Indian Act. That is what our band cards say. When you become a member, you become, an official Indian. So let's not lie about the terminology that is still being used on Indigenous people today. One of the things that people need to understand as well is the structural relationship, the structural institutionalized racism, which has become the norm. So that if anybody who is fighting against that, you are viewed as someone who is a troublemaker, you're ostracized. One of the things that Indian Residential School did was a lot of cultural shaming. So when people do speak out within the community amongst ourselves, it's kind of like, it seems like, again, you're a troublemaker and you don't understand the way the world works. Well, we're living in a pandemic. We're living within the prophecy times our ancestors told us about, which is climate change. And climate change is a very real thing, and is something that, our generation will be having to deal with. And it's not for lack of trying. For Indigenous people, as James Anaya, the former special rapporteur at the UN on Indigenous issues, said, Indigenous people are suffering the most from climate change. Our way of life, our culture, our customs, our language, everything, our quality of life, and yet we have contributed the least to climate change. So what does this all mean? It means that when you develop something, when you cut a tree, when you have these bulldozers coming in to create whatever kind of facility that you need, there's a lot of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. And, we have not been able to enjoy all our rights as human beings. Canada has many UN legal obligations that it has signed to, conventions and treaties, all of which are part of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And this is something that is a decolonial framework that can be used so that we can improve our relationship, we can improve the quality of life, we can improve the kind of world that we're seeing. There's an injustice that is being done. There's never been a moment for us to breathe. 30 years ago, we had our human rights, our fundamental human rights violated, and nobody was answered. Nobody answered to that. There was nobody held accountable to it. We were viewed as being the aggressor, when actually we only blocked a secondary dirt road. It was not the main highway, and we were attacked in such a vicious and brutal way. There's still ramifications within the community. So it's really about being, colonization has a really huge propaganda machine, and when it's really active, people who are land defenders are viewed as criminals, and there's countless examples right across Canada of land defenders being criminalized, getting hurt from police brutality. It's not just the Wet'suwet'en. Here in 1990, the Swiss Quebec police officers and the Canadian Army tortured men, and they did all kinds of shameful acts towards all the people. So we're looking at a society that it seems to be evolving, but it's not really evolving. When it comes to Indigenous people, this is my impression and this is my feeling, is that we are viewed as the disposable people. And so Canada's recreation, whether now it's with the legalization of marijuana, whether it's sports, whether it's more golf courses, whatever it is all part of the colonial project that has been designed to oppress and undermine Indigenous peoples' human rights and rights to self-determination. It's all part of the colonial project. Your land acknowledgement was really interesting, and that, as an institution that has also perpetuated colonization, I'm kind of curious as to what is the reparations that your institution is willing to do. Because you as the students are you're going to be the ones who will feel if there's any improvements or if we're sliding backwards, and you'll be able to see that. So I think that when we talk about land, we need to talk about respect for the land and how we use it and what it's for. We're talking about climate change that will really have devastating impacts on food sovereignty. It will have devastating impacts on the enjoyment of our rights, and we need to be aware of that. We need to stop compartmentalizing issues and see them all as intertwined, interconnected, and having a relationship where if one is negatively impacted of your human rights or the environmental rights, then you cannot join. You cannot enjoy your human rights. So I guess that's it. That's it for now. So thank you. I've been looking at a black screen, so I don't know if anybody is out there. Thank you. Go on again.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Just want to mention to everyone as well, we shared in a link to the event two links to the documentary 270 Years of Resistance at Kanehsatà. So if you do have the chance to watch that, we do encourage you to do that. And then just drawing on some of the themes that Ellen brought up, especially regarding prioritization of capitalism over human rights, and specifically Indigenous right to sovereignty in Canada in relation to recreation, and thinking of recreation not only in the sense of sports, but also marijuana as an activity of recreation. We'd like to just pose the questions, or I would like to just share the questions that we posed to Jacqueline Scott to address. So the questions that we posed for Jacqueline are both sports organizations and institutions of the state play an integral role in the reproduction of the discourse that Canada is synonymous with whiteness. How have you seen settler colonialism and anti-Black racism produced through mainstream outdoor recreational activities? And can you share with us strategies of resistance or reclamation of sport and recreation spaces that you have engaged in, and what would you like to see change?
Hello. Okay. Thanks, Shannon, and for inviting me to the session. And thank you, Ellen, for that very, very moving session as well. What I want to focus on is looking at how race combines with place, and specifically with land. So what I'm looking at is in terms of outdoor recreation and how it combines with race and how it combines with place. And the first thing I'd like people to think about was, when you think of the wilderness, what kind of images pop into your mind? And typically, when we think of the wilderness, we see it as a place where you go camping, hiking, canoeing, snowshoeing. And what my research is looking at, is the wilderness a natural space, or is it man-made? Part of the colonial praxis, the colonial project in Canada, occurs when we think about the formation of national parks. And the parks are built on the assumption that the land is pristine and that it's worth conserving. But at the heart of that pristine land is actually indigenous dispossession of the land. The land was never terra nullius or empty. It has always been indigenous land. And when we form national parks and we disavow who the land belongs to, it becomes part of a colonial project that this land was empty and therefore ripe for the taking. My research is looking at some of that. I'm also looking at how outdoor recreation continues the colonial project in the sense that outdoor is often coded as a white space where Black people are seen as out of place. So the idea that the wilderness, that outdoor recreation is neutral, it's a very colonial project. And what I'm also looking at is in terms of, I guess the key question I'm trying to answer is, how do you make outdoor recreation more welcoming for Black people? Why is it that you see so few Black people who are involved in skiing, hiking, canoeing, in bird watching? And there are conventional explanations that for example, we're not interested, our culture is against it. But from a social justice perspective, I'm interrogating all of those. So the things that I'm looking at is in terms of how race and how space combine. One of the things we look at is that it's the assumption that Black people are more at home in the city and we don't like urban recreation. Sorry, we don't like outdoor recreation. And part of the roots of that is that we do like outdoor recreation, but one of the big problems that we face in outdoor recreation is the issue around fear. And it's not the fear just of bugs or potentially bears or what do you wear. The key underlying fear for the Black community is in terms of race-based violence. When you're in the city, you always have a witness. There are more of us here, but when you go into the wilderness, when you go to do outdoor recreation, the chances are you might be the only one in the group. So if something happens, where's your witness? And the fear of that race-based violence has its roots in slavery. On the slavery days, if you're Black and you're outdoors, you're meant to be working. If you're not working, you're probably up to no good, as in plotting yet another slave rebellion. And that leads to today where it's the over-surveillance of Black bodies in public spaces. In the urban areas, it's the over-surveillance in terms of encounters with the police. If you're out in the wilderness or out in the ravines in Toronto, it's a sense that you can't really relax because anecdotally what you hear is that somebody's going to call the police, especially if it's a group of Black youth who are hanging out in the ravines or hanging out in the parks. There's always a sense that, yep, you can't really relax. You're looking over your shoulder for that police. And these are some of the issues that my research is exploring. And in terms of my research has bigger implications for the entire environmental field and conservation as well, because also in those areas, it's the absence of Black faces, people of color in general. And I think what Ellen was saying in terms of we're not the ones who are causing the problems, but we are the ones who are most affected by it. But yet still, when you look at the leadership in those areas, it's a sea of white faces. So the environment becomes a continuation of the colonial project. And, but yet still, for those who are involved in the climate crisis, there's much more diversity there. And one of the things that I've noticed with the impact of COVID is that there are more people of color in the ravines in the city. There are more of us who are showing up in the parks, the national and the provincial parks. So it presents an opportunity for those organizations to figure out how to make us feel welcome, or are they hoping that after COVID, we will go away? And some of the strategies for engaging Black and Indigenous and other people of color in the outdoor. I guess the very basic one is to hire those people. Now think of all the times you've been into the provincial or the national park. Who was on staff? No, where were the Black people? Where were the Indigenous people? and not just as summer students. And in terms of Indigenous people doing the land acknowledgement, those are very important, but where are they as part of the permanent staff, the frontline staff and the management staff? When they are on staff, they help to make decisions in terms of what is important. But when they're not on staff, it reaffirms the idea that outdoor recreation, conservation, ecology, the environment, those are all white spaces where BIPOC people are not really welcomed unless it's for an Instagram opportunity. I'm sure, again, think of a lot of those social media feeds of organization. You see us there as one-offs, but unless we're hired and promoted and supported on the staff, then it's just merely a token. The other thing that I'm looking at is in terms of Black people are using social media to find each other. We're turning segregation into congregation. Segregation in that many of us think that we're the only ones who are interested because we don't tend to find each other readily, but through social media, we're finding each other. The recent example earlier this year was Black Birders Week, which became a sensation on Twitter because it brought for the first time all those who are in recreation or scientists and bird watching that all came together, and it has become another movement as well as a moment on social media, and it's something that is not going to go away. And for the national parks, the provincial parks, the conservation authorities, they need to engage Black people because prior to COVID, membership of a lot of outdoor recreation clubs was falling. Visits to national park and provincial parks was down. And if you think of all the parks that are within a 2-hour drive of Toronto, they depend on people from Toronto for visits. Yet in Toronto, BIPOC people are 50% of the population. So if we are not showing up at the national, provincial park, the conservation areas, then who is showing up? And if they want their numbers to increase, then they actually have to cater to people like us. And in terms of catering to us, it's recognizing that one, racism is an issue, and that two, if you want to increase the participation rate of Black people visiting the parks, then you have to do targeted outreach. The general outreach in terms of come to the parks, it's great. It doesn't work for the community because we have no relationships. And given that our orientation to the outdoors, our cognitive map to the outdoors is based on a legacy of slavery and fear of race-based violence, then the targeted outreach is what's going to get us there. A generic come to the woods is not going to work for the community. So in terms of wrapping up then, for me, the most important thing in engaging Black people with the outdoors is hire Black staff, promote Black staff, support Black staff. And while all of that is being done, it's also hiring Indigenous staff, supporting Indigenous staff, and promoting Indigenous staff. Because the land on which where we do outdoor recreation is Indigenous land, and it is important that that land is acknowledged and that the people on the staff reflect the reality of who is in Toronto and who are the visitors to those parks. And when you have Black people in the park, it disrupts the colonial project because our presence there begs the question in terms of how race and how space are combined. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jacqueline. I really appreciate the way that you deconstructed the idea that outdoor recreation spaces are neutral and experience the same way for different communities, and for providing those concrete examples of how we can challenge the colonial project. And so, Nicole, similarly, I was wondering if you could respond to these questions. Are there examples that you'd like to share of colonial paradigms and a culture of whiteness in sport and recreation? And as well, how can cultures of whiteness and colonization in sport and rec be disrupted and dismantled, particularly thinking about how those at the university or who are involved in sport and recreation or wellness sectors can do to support the work in solidarity.
Miigwech. I just wanted to first say how amazingly humbled and honored I am to be here with Ellen and Jacqueline and be able to speak here. So I just wanted to give thanks for that, and to all our relations that are here with us. I wanted to kind of share a story of that speaks to this, that speaks to that colonial project that Ellen spoke about, that renders us invisible. I've been raised in the city. I don't know reserve life. I know city life. I gained an understanding of my culture here. My grandmother is a residential school survivor, so it's here in Toronto that I gained back that cultural understanding and became a dancer many years ago, and have been walking as best as I can in that good way, in that Minoba Matswin. There was one time we did a workshop at Native Women's, and I remember after the end of the workshop, we did a workshop for a ribbon skirt making. And after this workshop was done, we got tickets for the National Ballet. And I remember all of us being excited. You know, I had never been to a ballet before. And a lot of the participants, our community members in this program, were also excited too. Some small children and all of us, we had gone down. There must have been maybe 12 of us. And I remember as we're sitting, well, first we hear it's the last rehearsal night. So, I mean, it's nice to get the tickets, but when we got down there, we found, oh, we get to come for that rehearsal night. You know, we're not there in that opening night. And who would then be allowed into that opening night? Who gets those tickets? How much are they, right? So we're here, you know, this rehearsal night, these free tickets given to Native Women's. We're watching these beautiful dancers, and I look around and I think, there's 8 of us here that are dancers. How did these dancers get a space like this? And this isn't even a First Nation style of dance. So they came here and then erased our dance that was illegal until the Wild Wild West show came about. So how did they get this here? And what does that look like? And so all these questions started popping up in my mind. And you know, for a lot of us, it's that land speaking to us. Because I know a lot of the times here in the city, you know, because it's so condensed, we can forget that it's colonized land as well. You know, we forget that when we walk down the city and it's just that concrete, that at one space, you know, the Don River that's right beside me, I live in the Distillery District, was once connected to our lakes. There used to be many, many animals that lived there. You know, what does that look like? You know, so as a dancer, to see that ballet and how it's celebrated by colonization, and you know, and you know, to touch on what Ellen had spoke about that dish with one spoon, and how we don't take what we need more than we need. You know, I thought about, well, here at the end of the day, this building remains. Lights are on long after we're gone, when it's empty. You know, we think about our first dancers. Our oldest style of grass dancer is the grass dance. You know, those dancers, they come in and they bless that ground, and they pat it down so that when we have our dances, we leave and the grass comes back up like it's never, like we were never there. It's to not leave a marking into Mother Earth. So that is one of the ways in which whiteness in sports and recreation, for me, I would like to highlight that, because it was a pivotal moment for me. Now, how can cultures of whiteness and colonization get disrupted in sports and recreation? I can speak to my intersectionality as being a dancer here in Toronto. I've been at many spaces where there's been opening of government buildings where, you know, they come in just like the land acknowledgement, you know, come in, have dancers that will come and, you know, kind of, I guess, to the colonizers' eyes, I'm not too sure why they use us in this way, like directly, but to have us in those spaces to open it up or bless it in those things. Although it's nice to have that presence there, you know, it always leaves that bad taste in the mouth of being used by that colonizer. And one of the ways, especially through this COVID, that I found is the most empowering is walking the streets in my regalia, walking to go to our rallies, our protests, teaching my young girls the responsibilities of a dancer. Yes, it's good for our physical well-being. Of course, it's good for our community well-being, but we also have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to stand with our land defenders and to those who are in those allied positions, and to create that good energy when need be. So just recently, my daughters and I, we were at Dundas Square taking up space. And we talk the land back to me in the city, that is a form of land reclamation, is to be able to occupy that space. And I found it interesting when we were down there for in support of the Mi'kma'ki, when all eyes were on them, when that commercial fishing was really coming down on our brothers and sisters there, to occupy Dundas Square and to shut it down. And then to think about, it's interesting how we're the inconvenience, but when it was the Raptors winning the championship, of course, they could shut down all of Dundas Square and the whole city, mind you, and you know, the police and all non-native people didn't bat an eye. The city was in pure solidarity. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, when that happened, imagine if we could gather like that when Wet'suwet'en was being invaded, what that would look like. You know, so that's one, is to take up that space, and that's where we can disrupt it, is coming back in. And also, what can the university do? Well, as an equity studies student, I can say I would love if every program had to take a equity studies course as a prerequisite. You know, in our undergrads, we have to take a science. An equity course should be mandatory for all degrees, to understand the othering that happens through colonization, to understand why certain departments might have that colonial framework and what that does. I'm lucky enough that just before this pandemic, I was with Chani Desai in our Theorizing Equity course, and we were actually, it was just right when Wet'suwet'en was being invaded, we were in our studies, and it was to have that pedagogy that Professor Desai and others in the equity study program, Stan Doylewood, so many other professors that have this pedagogy, this Indigenous pedagogy, that they can make change happen while we're in studies. So Chani was able to bring in Eve Saint, a good friend of ours, a very powerful land defender, and bring them in to speak, and also raise some funds for the Wet'suwet'en land defenders. So those are the ways in which the university themselves can help. But I always find it's the people within the university, not the actual system itself. And if, you know, we understand that that colonial system is heartless, it does not have that feeling. So it's those that work within it that make those spaces and those pockets for us to do this work. Yeah, I think that's about it. Again, you know, just this conversation, just this talk brings that breath out. And as the amazing Ellen said, that, you know, that when they had been there defending at Oka there, that there wasn't that chance to breathe. So we've got to give that space to be able to breathe and have our stories told. Miigwech for that, I hope. I hope I answered the questions that.
Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience and the way that exemplified the way colonial activities of like recreation and profit with recreation has invisibilized like Indigenous culture, and the way that you connected that to ways you disrupt colonialism in spaces. Thank you so much for making those connections and for sharing that. I would like to say, thank you to all our speakers for the ways they shared that white supremacy and colonialism can be disrupted in spaces. At this point, we would like to open up a Q&A session from participants. If anyone has any questions that they might like to ask our speakers at this time, you can bring them forward.
Thanks for that, Katie. And just as people are typing out their questions, I'm aware that Ellen did need to leave just around 6 o'clock. So I wanted to give my thanks in advance. So thank you so much to our amazing speakers, Ellen Gabriel, Jacqueline Scott, and Nicole Levesque. That was really fantastic and really poignant analysis into better understanding the connections between colonization and recreation. Thanks to everyone who's here attending and listening and learning and unlearning. A special thank you to the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education, the Diversity Moves Us team, Robin Wally and Ryan Farouk, as well as thanks to everyone who assisted us with our IT support tonight. And so, yeah, happy to open up the Q&A period now. And yes, there's a question about where can we find the link to the documentary about the Siege of Kanehsatà, and that was sent out in the email that had the link to this event. And we will circulate some resources after the event, and we'll include that again. So Dr. Janelle Joseph has a question, and she has posed a question I'll share with all of the speakers. Can we discuss ways to bring the body into the classroom? And she just shares her thanks to the speakers, and she appreciates you. So Ellen, if did you want to start? I think you were muted, but.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank Jacqueline and Nicole for their inspirational talk, and it sort of complements. I think we all complemented each other, so thank you. I'm not sure what if I understand what that means to bring the body into the classroom. I think about a pandemic. I'm not an academic, so. You'll have to be a bit more explicit in what you mean by bringing the body into the classroom. But I think, if we're talking about bringing your body, mind, and soul into the classroom, that's embodied learning. See there, I'm not an academic. I have no clue what you're talking about. Embodied learning. What does that mean? We all have learning. We all have learning. Style differences, but for Indigenous people, and I think 3/4 of the world, we're very visual, and so our ancestral teachings talk about being on the land, and what does that mean? For us, it includes also the language. Our languages are based on the land, and it's based on that relationship that we have with the natural environment, because I think we're unnatural in many ways in how we approach the land and how we use the land as a society, but not as individuals, but as a society as a whole. And it's really about taking the time to learn. Everybody has their specialties, but there's so much to be said about touching things, smelling things that also help your memory. Whatever it is that we are trying to do as human beings to make a just society, to make a equitable society, requires the time and effort to be able to understand other people's opinions, other people's perspectives. But, you know, the way we've learned, like whether it's Indian residential school, I'll speak as an Indigenous person, whether it's Indian residential school's impacts or the day school impacts, we are still feeling those effects. And it's multi-generational, and I don't know, I'm not sure when that will finish. We are learning that the norm is based on the colonizer and the racist version of who we are. So it's unlearning that. It's decolonizing our minds. And how do we decolonize our minds? It's a nice thing to say, decolonize, but it actually means being able to be able to see beyond ourselves as being the most important species on this planet. It's about being able to understand what it is that we need to nurture ourselves. We need food. Well, we since 1936, all food has had pesticides on them. And then we're dealing with genetically modified organisms. And then we're dealing with nanotechnology. And we're dealing with all kinds of things that have commodified the natural world. And I think that's what we need to understand, because one of the things that we have no control about is the weather. And the sun is actually the one that controls the weather, because we're living on a planet that is made of mostly water, air, all those elements that we're thinking about. And to, as I said earlier, to decompartmentalize how we learn, and to be able to understand that the perspectives that or the norms that we've all grown up, in a sense, accepting, is not acceptable. It's still, for us as Indigenous people, it's about the colonizer or the racist. These racist doctrines in which, racism, as Kwame Ture says, racism is not a question of attitude, it's a question of power. And do we have the power to change how we learn? Yeah, we do. We do. Anything is possible if this is what we want. And if we're going to accept the norm of the dysfunctional way in which we're learning, then so be it. But we need to respect other people who do not want that norm, and who want to feel part of the natural world and not alienated from it. So I guess I'll end there, and I'll let the other panelists answer the question. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ellen. Jacqueline, did you want to add to Ellen?
Yeah. And I think bringing the body into the classroom triggers two things for me. The first one is that and in the classroom, I'm looking very specifically at outdoor education, environmental education. And in that classroom space is that not all bodies are read in the same way. So when a Black person shows up in that space, there's a whole ton of assumptions that goes with that Black body, because that space is seen as a white space. So when a Black person shows up, it's a sense of, what are you doing here? And so the idea that the outdoors is neutral or it's a transparent, it's clearly not true. So bringing the Black body into the outdoor classroom means talking about issues around slavery, about racism, and about how those structure the Black experience in the outdoors. So that's one issue. The second issue is that much of outdoor education is actually based on Indigenous technology, but it's not acknowledged. For example, the snowshoes that we use, that's Indigenous technology. The canoeing and the kayaking, those are Indigenous technology. But the sports is represented as neutral without understanding that these are actually Indigenous technology that we're using. And likewise, when you think of camping as a rite of passage for Canadians, but the crafts, the skills that are used in typical camping are actually based on Indigenous skills. But once again, those are erased from the camping experience, from the outdoor education. So part of bringing the body into the outdoor classroom for me would involve acknowledging and understanding that the very technology that you're using on your backpacking, camping, canoeing, hiking, snowshoeing trips are actually Indigenous technology. And the moment you bring Indigenous there, then you have to talk about Indigenous relationship to the land and how settler colonialism works, and how by us erasing the Indigenous technology, we become part of the settler colonial projects. And so, yes, we need to bring the body into the classroom, and bringing the body into the classroom means talking about how race and space interact for me.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And I think in answering your question, you even started to answer another question in the chat. Somebody was asking, how can I connect with and advocate for Indigenous culture, respecting Indigenous culture without being culturally appropriative? And so, Nicole, maybe you want to respond to both of those pieces, embodied learning and cultural appropriation.
Mm-hmm. I will share like a personal story of the embodiment piece, because as a lot of our not just First Nations, all other beings suffer that colonial violence through the education system, and it's expressed in different ways depending how the colonial eye reads us. So I remember I'm an older student. So I came into university after already having a career and having a health problem, having a health condition that made it so that I had to take a career change. So then I came in as an Indigenous body, who's kind of culturally ambiguous in my appearance, and then also what they say is disabled. The embodiment piece is, I didn't realize until I got into U of T classrooms that my body actually spoke onto itself, and I needed to understand what that was. So there'd be times where if I didn't already know something, I would suffer from high anxiety. I would start to shake, and I had to ask myself, well, what is this? And it took a lot of time to understand what my body was saying to me, to understand what was happened to me, if this makes sense. So I had gone to a psych assessment through accessibility services, and through that I had a psychologist kind of look at my body reactions to certain questions that were posed to me, did this assessment, and he said, what happened to you when you were in grade school? Now, as Ellen had spoke about that the effects of residential and day schools in our bodies and through us and through intergenerational. So I said, oh, I don't remember. He said, when you get asked certain questions, you get high anxiety and all of those things. And I never felt safe in the school system until I could understand myself. So after this assessment, I realized when I was in grade school, certain things that were allowed and weren't allowed as being a very visual learner, how that is policed, and how our different ways of knowing become policed based on where we're from, how our natural ways of learning, and then what has been done to us historically through colonization and what that looks like, and how that differs. So for me, it was finding the safe spaces. So I'm constantly, even now, looking for courses. I'm like, oh, who's the professor? Who's teaching that? Am I going to be safe with them? Because if not, I'll flee. I'll run right away from the university and I won't finish my degree. Which then I have other community members being like, hey, get on that, get that degree. And then I'll talk a little bit about allyship and appropriation. I guess in allyship and in appropriation, just know our space and where we can speak and when we cannot speak to something. And understanding that creating that space for Indigenous and non, like people, other beings in all senses, to have that space and that rightful space to share their stories and not to speak for. Creating space is also like a form of, I think of like in the classroom, it's not land because we can't get down to the land, we can't get past the concrete, but we can create a sense of land and that safety that nature would give us within our classroom, so to speak, kind of metaphorically, and to create that safe spaces. I think that, me good.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you for explaining how ways of knowing are very much policed and how that is related to accessibility in classrooms. That was a really interesting point, and thank you. Jacqueline, a question was brought up earlier in the chat about community coming together in social media, about your point about community coming together in social media and then creating community in outdoor spaces as well. And this question asks, how would we learn more about what you are observing in this regard?
In terms of social media, for example, there's a hashtags like Black Birders Week, Black in Nature, Black Outdoors, organizations like Color the Trail, Brown Girl Outdoor World, Unlikely Hikers. So basically, BIPOC organizations are tired of waiting for white organizations to know that we exist. We also want to connect to nature. We also understand that we are part of nature. We're not separate from it. Humans are part of nature. But if we wait for white organizations to come to us, it's not going to happen. And so we're using social media to find each other and to plan trips, to share knowledge, just to bring reassurance that, no, you're not the only one. There are others of us who are there. And we're also using social media to start discussions in terms of allyship with Indigenous groups, whether in terms of land stewardships or in terms of shared outdoor recreation activities. So that is how we're trying to turn being segregated or isolated into something, because collectively we can make change, whereas individually you often end up feeling that, oh, here I go yet again, there's nothing that I can do.
And Ellen, I know that you needed to leave a little early, but before you go, I was wondering if you had anything to add about social media and community. I know that I follow you on Twitter, and I know that you continue to share your analysis and organize on social media.
Yeah, I kind of wonder what the outcome of tonight would have been had we had the opportunity for social media. But I think it's really important because it's a tool. It allows us a voice, because the colonizer is so bent on silencing us. They will provide a platform for those who are co-opted into the colonial project. But for those who are still resisting, as we did, as our ancestors did, social media is a wonderful tool. I mean, there's the pros and cons of social media, of course, but it allows us a platform and a voice that has been denied us for so many centuries. And I think it's a tool that we need to respect. It's a tool that we need to maybe also bring, I think, be a little bit more efficient. I think it's for me, because I'm not the generation where this technology came out. When I was in university, I had to write or type my papers or find somebody to type my papers. So technology for me is still something I'm learning, and it's difficult to have a conversation for me. I find it frustrating. If someone wants to have a dialogue on Twitter or on Facebook, I find it's just more difficult for me. So I prefer like this. This is really a wonderful way to get going, and this is another platform that technology is using. So I'm really grateful for it, and I'm really grateful to Oisy and all the panelists for what they've done, because I think every opportunity we have to talk about our issues to promote social justice for everyone is a gift. And sometimes, you know, we fail maybe to be able to write things. That's another thing about texting. It doesn't really convey the spirit or the essence of what you're saying that we are having in this discussion. But it's a great tool, and it's, thank you for following me, by the way, Shannon. Because there are times when, you know, because we're such a colonized community and the problems that we have, sometimes people are afraid to speak. I saw someone on Facebook say, I'm afraid to go to the protest because I'm afraid for my safety. And so we use this either as the public to witness what is going on, whether it's racist or whether it's within our own community. It provides us a broader audience to witness the plight of our people and the struggles of our people. So I'm very thankful. It's a very good question, and I'm grateful that we have this technology today. So I want to thank Jacqueline and Nicole, Shannon, and everybody who joined. I have to sign off, but it was a great pleasure and an honor, and I wish you all the best in all your work. So thank you all. It's a great honor for me as well.
Thank you so much for being with us, Ellen. It was really fantastic to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, for joining us, for all your insight. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Take care.
We have another question in the chat, but Nicole, I was wondering if you also wanted to speak about the importance of social media and bringing community together outdoor. As I know, you know, for example, earlier when you were speaking about the event at Yonge and Dundas Square, right, and the importance of disrupting colonial space there, and maybe perhaps making connections to the way, you know, social media is used to spread awareness about events such as those.
Yeah, very good. And to Ellen for bringing that part in, because I got very excited when she started speaking about our social media and how we can, especially now in COVID. I remember my grandmother actually talking about that Spider Woman prophecy. Some of you might know that one about when she weaved her web. We learned how to write, and that she would weave it again, and it would bring us all together, and it would be that internet. So it's beautiful to live in these times where we have that, because yes, I wouldn't have been at Dundas Square that time if it wasn't for social media. And it's not just the social media of connecting so that we can stay connected to be at the space at the right time, but it's also like there were some great photos there, and we think, okay, yeah, photos, but it was from this Joshua Bess, who's an ally, and he said, I come here to document you and what's going on, because this won't be in the news. All your smiling faces and good vibes here, that wouldn't be on CP24. So I'm here to do this work. And that in itself is beautiful, to actually be dancing on the actual land itself, and to have those who might not be able to be there in that space still be connected through that social media. Recently, as we know, the encampments here in Toronto, you know, there's a good friend of ours and our community member who recently was at the hospital, who is in one of an encampments there, and who actually got housed in a hotel by the city, and they had actually was in the hospital, and we couldn't get in to see them. And this was just after Joyce's family had lost Joyce. And so there was that scared, and it's like, what can we do? So we danced. As a Jingle Dress dancer, we danced down there for that healing, and so that she could now, that our community member, our sister could now watch us. Even though we couldn't get into the room, we danced outside from a live feed, and they could watch us right there. So even though we couldn't get into the hospital to actually be there in solidarity, we were outside, and that gave that strength. And also too, to let those there know that even though she's in there, we know that our community members in there, and then what that looks like. also to bring that allyship in. It's so beautiful to see so many, like I've been at protests throughout the years, you know, not as many as I would like, but you know, throughout the past 15 years, and just to see the number of allies grow within that. At one point it was just our First Nation community here, and now to see, oh hey, who are you? That is beautiful, and to see those numbers grow. And that is through having that social media, so that we can actually see what is actually happening. And to watch that live feed just recently at Wet'suwet'en, when we saw those 4 land defenders, we were right there watching. So I'm good for that.
Thank you so much. You know, there's lots of comments in the chat just expressing gratitude to all of the speakers for sharing your analysis and really powerful personal stories. And so we're not going to take any more questions tonight, but I just wanted to give the opportunity to the speakers, if you had any, like a final thought you wanted to share with those that had joined, who are, you know, perhaps thinking about where they might fit in terms of solidarity, or any other thoughts you wanted to leave us with. So Jacqueline, did you want to start?
I would just say that nature is absolutely amazing, and we all need to reconnect to nature, especially in times of climate crisis and as COVID. And while we're outdoors enjoying nature, it's also remembering that depending on what our bodies look like, when we show up, we bring a history with us, and it's acknowledging that history. And above all else, it's acknowledging that the land that we're walking on, the land that we're doing our snowshoeing, our this time of year, the hiking on, maybe the skiing on, is Indigenous land. And to think in terms of ways of how can we build allyship and undermine the settler colonial project, which is basically telling us that if you're not white, you don't belong. We do all belong on the land. Yeah, we share space.
Well, Jacqueline, I really love that you've really changed my way of, you know, thinking, because before this talk I was thinking of, you know, certain land space, but to be, when you're running that outdoor education, it really started to make me think about that, because as I shared about how my body reacted inside of the colonial spaces, what it would look like if it was outside, and what that connection would be. So I'm thankful for that, because it really got me thinking about that, and, you know, just ending that it is about land back. That's what it is, and what that is for all of, like, for each individual, you know, what that kind of looks like. And Jacqueline, you said it all. Connect back, have that relationship. You know, I miss when I was little. I still lived in the city, but I could open up my door and have like raccoons right there, squirrels right there, like that that connection. I didn't have that outside. So Jacqueline, you really brought me back into that, like, relationship building and building that. So that would be my last words: to build that relationship with that outside, with nature, at all seasons. Yeah, miigwech.
Thank you so much for those powerful final thoughts. And so just a few final comments for everyone. Again, I just want to express a really deep gratitude to the speakers for being with us tonight, and sharing these really powerful thoughts and personal thoughts about colonialism, sports, and recreation. And thank you as well to all of our collaborators that allowed this to be possible. I have dropped in the chat a link to a survey, so you can provide our group, our SJE Solidarity group, with any feedback about our event organization, or things you'd like to see us organize in the future, and what else you'd like to learn. And I'm just going to share my screen, because not that screen, this screen, because we had a few resources we wanted to highlight for you, and we'll also circulate these in an email afterwards. So, you know, we talked tonight a lot about how to work in solidarity to undermine the colonial project, And so these are some key resources if you want to get involved in current day land and water defense movements. So there's the Wet'suwet'en Supporter Toolkit, which our group took as foundational in guiding our solidarity action. There's information and ways to support the Gidmatan checkpoint. There is the 1492 Land Back Lane Supporter Toolkit. And these toolkits give really specific suggestions about what is needed by those communities, or how you can amplify their voices and support them. And there's also ways to support the Mi'kmaq treaty rights and livelihood fisheries. And then finally, information on the tiny house warriors and ways to support. So again, we'll circulate all of these links afterwards, but I did just want to highlight them. There is a current petition called No Archaeological Digs in Kanehsatà via the Action Network. And so, you know, we can see from 20 years ago, we're still having many of the similar struggles with respecting treaties in Canada. There's also Indigenous journalism and news organizations to follow support, such as the Real People's Media and the Kukukwes News. Lastly, I want to name First Nations House at U of T as a center you can go for support and learning. There's also the North American Indigenous Games and Indigenous Sport and Wellness Ontario. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. I know there's a lot going on this week as it's Indigenous Education Week. So I just really want to thank you for being with us today. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.